Hello everyone. So, starting to write music can be seen as a very daunting and difficult task to start. And so that is why I'm bringing 4 tips that can help you really, get started writing music. Now these tips will be for those of you who don't have extensive theory knowledge or maybe even don't know how to read music notation very well. Now another quick disclaimer is that these tips are fairly one size fits all. So if you find an exception to one of these rules, go ahead and explore it, see if you can come up with something interesting. But generally speaking, these tips are going to help you get started. So if you find this video helpful, go ahead and click that like button down below and subscribe so you never miss another video, and hit the notification bell so that you get notified when my next video goes up. So let's go and take a look at my 4 tips to become a better composer. So tip number 1, learn different types of motion. There are 4 different ways 2 lines of music, or voices as I may call them, can move with each other. There's similar, parallel, contrary, and oblique motion. Let's go and start with similar and parallel. Similar and parallel motion are when 2 lines of music move in the same direction. However, the difference between those two is that parallel is that the 2 notes will move the exact same distance or interval with each other, while similar, although they move in the same direction, will not move in the same interval or in the same amount of distance. Contrary motion is when 2 notes will move in opposite directions. Doesn't matter how far away, as long as one note moves up and the other note moves down, they're moving in contrary motion. And oblique motion is simply when one note will stay the same while the other one will move either up or down. Basically, one note moves while the other doesn't. Now, contrary motion is considered to be the most sophisticated type of motion, as it will typically sound more interesting than the others just by having the 2 notes move in opposite directions. While parallel motion is seen to be the laziest and the least interesting because you're simply taking 2 notes and moving them the exact same, and it just sounds really lazy and boring. Albeit, again, there are exceptions to these rules. If you're trying to write a pop punk song, for example, you're gonna lose a lot of power chords, and listening to a song like Green Day's Holiday, for example, you're gonna use only parallel motion, especially in those guitar parts using power chords. Also, knowing how to move voices around each other can help when coming up with melodies, harmonies, backgrounds, or any other type of line of music. Now, tip 2 is knowing how to sequence, and sequencing is when you restate a line of music when you start it on a different pitch. So this is a very simple way to extend a decent musical idea, melody, or motif into a good or great one with relatively little effort, and it can sound great when it's done very well. Just remember that this can be overdone very easily, so use its technique sparingly, or not to be your main focus of the piece / song / composition you are writing at the time. Tip number 3 is developing your ear, or doing ear training. When learning music in any way or any level, it is always important to develop one's ear. This is one of those things that you are never ever truly done doing. As a composer, this can be used to listen to a piece of music and be able to tell what chord progression, what time signature, or even key signature, just to name a few examples that are in most if not all parts of music, that you can then replicate in your own way without needing to do extremely tedious analysis. And trust me, those are not fun ways to spend an evening. And if you don't know what to listen for, just the act of focused listening, saying, oh, that chord moved up, or hey, that chord moved down, or saying, oh, here is the pulse, or anything like that is focused listening and developing your ear. And my tip number 4 really piggybacks on tip number 3, however, it is also distinct enough that I believe it warrants its own slot on this list, and that is to listen to various composers. Listening to various composers will not only help you learn different styles of music, but it can also help you learn different styles of composition. Using classical composers for an example, let's look at 2 romantic composers, Chopin and Schubert. They're both, again, from the Romantic era. For those who don't know when that is, that's most of the 19th century, from about 1820 to right before World War I, around 1900 or so. And so listening to how Chopin wrote music and how Schubert wrote music will help you learn how these 2 guys wrote for maybe the same instrument, but wrote very differently from each other. And for a more modern example, let's look at 2 groups that I think are fairly similar that maybe you don't really think are very similar. And those 2 groups are Coldplay and Imagine Dragons. I believe these 2 groups to be fairly similar styles of soft rock or pop music. However, just listening to a single album of each band will let you hear various differences between the 2 bands, like lyrical content, harmonic structure, or even what genres have influenced them into that respective style. And for those of you looking for any classical composers that you don't know where to start, I will leave a small list of material for you to get started listening to them in the description below. And do you all want a bonus tip? Don't be afraid to make mistakes or commit to an idea you are sure won't work but might surprise you. Because honestly, you can be surprised in what idea you might think would be bad will end up being a focal point in the piece you end up writing. Or an idea that you use but don't really think has much significance will end up becoming the main piece of your composition. That has happened to me numerous times, and it's just because I wasn't afraid to say, let's try this, and not worry if it ends up being a mistake. The worst mistake you can have is just simply not to try. I don't mean to sound like a motivational speaker, but even though that's what this tip is basically making me sound like. If that made any sense, my brain is kind of fried at this point. Sometimes you can be surprised in how wrong you can be in censoring what you initially try. Now, in conclusion, these tips won't turn a nobody into Bach, Mozart, or Beethoven, but they will help you get started on a journey to becoming the best composer that you can be. So in the future, I do plan to make more tip videos or other videos on learning how to compose, learning music theory, or anything like that. So if you want to stay up to date on those videos, make sure you subscribe down below and click that bell for whenever a new video gets uploaded, as well as click the like video if you haven't already, and comment below any of those ideas that you'd be interested in learning about, and I'll try to make that into a future video. And so with that being said, have a very lovely day.